So today, I wanted to share with you a little bit about what I do. When I would say almost that whole time I was out diving, I was always trying to find new wrecks. And a lot of times I would just dive out from shore and just look at areas. And as time marched on, technology got better, the bottom sounders became better. And I slowly moved over into sonar searching for shipwrecks. As I was learning more, I thought, oh, there should be one in this area or that area. And so I was working towards that. So then when my diving ended in 2019, it was a fairly easy transition and just to continue with the sonar work. Let's see. So with today's sonar, there's different types. There's the down view that we can see in the left. There's the toefish type units and side scan. All these have different capabilities and things. And so I'm going to read from some notes here I put down. The transducers, which emit the sound, it will propagate out and hit something and come back to the transducer, and then the computers go and they form an image that we see on the screen, and then that's what we use to determine what's there. And those transducers can be hull mounted, or they can be as a towfish, which B would be, or they can be an autonomous vehicle, which is kind of like a torpedo type thing that they pre-program, put in the water and just let it go, and it'll run a search pattern, come back up, and you have your data. The sonar display screens have a large amount of information. Of useful information. They also have different types that can see 360 degrees, and like I said earlier, the side scan type capabilities. But also it'll have your boat speed on there. It'll show your depth, temperature of water, the bottom profile. You can mark a spot on there. When you bring up the mapping feature, get your GPS location, and those are very accurate. Like I said earlier, charting, compass direction. The unit has various screen settings. It also has a track history. When you're on your charting function, it can show where you've been. So that is really useful. It can be affected by many things. The wind, and the wind then will, of course, affect the waves and the course of the boat. The water temperature with thermoclines can have a big effect on the imaging you get. How the unit is set up, your boat speed, weeds, and if you're on the open lake or near shore or on a shoal, all these things will have effects. So there's a lot of adjustments to do, and that's partially the fun of it. Before I go out, I like to know my subject. I like to know what area I'm going to be, and I kind of set up that day for where I'm going to be. It could be on a wreck, an old pier, an old crib, a shoal, a harbor. And then when I start my scanning, I try to do overlaps, at least 30 or 40% overlap. I try to pick my days where there's very little wind, if that can happen. If that can't happen, I'll then have to work with the wind and let my boat go with it so it runs as stable as possible, especially with the hull-mounted transducers. And if you really think something's down there, or if you catch something, you try to then go 90 degrees to your target and see if you can find more that way. The hull-mounted transducers, it has to be very, very calm out. If it's not, you'll still get an image, but you just won't get as good of an image. And what's nice with them is they're easy and fast to use. You don't have to deploy anything or set anything up. You pretty much can just go with what you have set up on the boat. And with the hull-mounted GPS units, they're a little more accurate, because if you have like a towfish out and you have 100 feet of cable out, the towfish is 100 feet behind the boat. but the GPS is actually reading where the unit is. So your numbers would be at least 100 feet out, if not a little bit more. With the hull mounted, that transducer is going to be closer to the sonar unit, and it will give you a much better number. With the toolfish units are nice because they get below the thermoclines and they get closer to the bottom and closer to possible shipwrecks. They're more stable, even if it's a little windy and there's some wave action. When a target is found, this is where the preparation comes into play too. I like to use hole markers that I've made for that day. So this type here is good for shallow areas, and put chains on there so they stay where I throw them. If not, the waves will kind of move them. For deeper water, this type here unwinds faster, gets to the bottom quicker, and you can be a little further away from it and still see it. And if I have a problem with that, I have other ones I've made that are even larger than this. So that's really important, I have found. And when I do find a target, I try to make as many passes over it as possible. And maybe even in a star pattern, if possible, with the wind that day. Another thing I do then is when I have these throw markers out where I want them around the target, then I really know where that target is, and I start learning it by making maybe dozens of passes. So what I'll do then is go upwind, and then I throw a little drop camera down like this. These are very small. In this particular one, I can record photos or videos with it. So I can start taking pictures. These are not high quality pictures, but these are good color pictures to give me an idea of what is down there. So that is also really helpful. So I don't have just the sonar data. I can leave that day with some photos and an idea of what's there. This method I use actually works really well. I've gotten pictures of stuff, very small, individual pure pile post and things. It's a good way to do that. So that's what I'm doing. And these are the two units I have. One is a 2013 Generation 2 Lowrance. So it's an older unit, but it functions very well and gives me excellent results. The other one is a Tollfish Garmin, 2020 Garmin, a 9-inch screen. And this one really is more for deeper water. The Lowrance works excellent in shallower water. This Garmin works very well for bigger targets out in deep water. So with these two units, I can search probably anywhere in the Great Lakes at any depth. This is the Lowrance mounted on the back of my inflatable boat that I use up here in Door County quite often. It's set up on a trolling motor mount, so when I'm going, the transducers are out of the water and I can go at speed. When I get to the site that I want to search, I just flip that down, the transducers are in the water, and I can start my searching. The inflatable boat is nice because I can run at very slow speeds to get really good slow speed data. And if it's too rough for this boat, it's too rough to go anyway. So a bigger boat isn't necessarily better. And I can not worry about hitting bottom most of the time. I can run right up into the shallows with this where a lot of other bigger boats wouldn't go, and search for things. It works very, very well. And this is me offshore in Door County here. That's the screen for that Lowrance. And it's clipped off right to that board across the seats on that inflatable. Looks like it could fall in easy. I've worried about that a few times, but it hasn't happened. This is the other one. This is the Garmin. This is the one that gets towed. There's 60 feet of cable there. And like I said, this one's more for deep water, big target hunting out in the lakes. And it works very good also. And this is on my other boat, the bigger boat. And you can see the screen. It's everything's portable. That one's just kind of tied off on the seat. And you can see the cable running out. behind the boat to the towfish that's being towed. Another thing I do, we don't see the top of it there, but I get usually a state permit when I'm doing this type of archaeology work. And the permit is free, it's easy to fill out, and all I do then is at the end of the year, I just write up what I found, if anything, and turn that back in. And that lets the state know what I found. It also lets them know that I'm the one that found it. And if you're going to be doing publishing or presentations like this, it's something you really should have. If you have any more questions, you can contact the State Historical Society and they'd be happy to answer that. But Wisconsin's very easy to work with on this type of thing. Another thing I do too sometimes is put these flags up. So this is the India and Romeo flags. And this indicates, these are international flags, and it indicates engaged in submarine work, keep clear. So that lets the other boaters, if they know what the flags mean, that they should stay away, because I'm probably restricted in maneuverability a little bit. And that's what I want, is people just to keep away from me. So this is a big day right here for me, May 13th, 2021. That's the inflatable boat I have, as usual, overloaded. And this is at the Sturgeon Bay boat launch. And what's happening here that day, I'm going to take you through the day, is the year before, I was up here in Sturgeon Bay, and a friend told me about a friend of his that had found a wreck years earlier near the canal over by the Highway 57 bridge. And he said that this guy had found this wreck and was diving. Well, after some work, I went and was able to get a hold of this guy. His name was Marshall Hanks. He was an old-time diver. And very interesting gentleman. I enjoyed every moment talking with him. And he related to me that back around 1968, a fella he knew was snorkeling out there and had seen a shipwreck mostly buried in the bottom of Sturgeon Bay here. And so a year or two later, him and another diver went out there and they started diving it. And they brought up all kinds of tools and equipment, and it was near a dock, and the vessel looked like it maybe had been burned. So working with Dick Boyd and Greg Kent, we determined that it was most likely the Mary L at that point. And the Mary L, one more picture here, that's what Marshall brought up in the early 1970s, all tools. The Mary L was owned by Barnsdorf out of Claybanks. It was a two-masted schooner scow. And they were using it as a barge being pushed around by a little gas launch or vessel called the Bell. And they had brought it over to somewhere, I think, in the area of that Highway 57-1 bridge. And it was on a dock there, picking up timber and hay, and it caught fire and burned. And some reports said it was put back in service, but the records indicate it probably was not. It was probably abandoned. It was too heavily damaged. That's all we had at that time. So I thought I was looking for the Mary L. But what didn't make sense to the story, because we're doing like detective work here all the time, is why were all these large tools on the Mary L if it's just hauling timber and hay? But you never know, might be more to the story. We just couldn't quite answer that part of it at that point. Some of it didn't make sense, but we were just gonna have to wait for more information. So in 2020, I went out and I was scanning out there and I just could not find anything where Marshall said this was. And there was a lot of weeds there. So back to that May, if you look, you'll see the date on that photo. Back to that May 13th, 2021, I went out that day. The weeds were down, but you can see here, I found two targets. Here's one here, and here's one here. Now, really all we need to be concerned about is this and this. The rest of this is just sonar data, but real quick, this white line is the track of my boat. The black on each side is the water below the boat. So that we're taking a 3D image and making it one-dimensional. So that's looking basically down. And then from here, this is from the bottom of the boat looking out each side. So you can see right here, there's still a lot of weeds. This choppy stuff, that's weeds, even in May, that were left over from last year. So this area, I can look at this, I can still see there's still a lot of weed growth on here. But I was able to see this in May where I couldn't see it at all last year. So getting out early paid off. And I can see there's something here. In that particular day, the water was very clear. I was able to look down and actually see this. It was really windy, but I was able to let the boat blow along with the wind and catch short glimpses of what this was. It was heavily encrusted with weeds, heavily encrusted with quagga mussels. I didn't even get any underwater pictures. A lot of times as I'm drifting by and I can see that, I can hold my underwater camera down there and take photos of it. It just wasn't possible that day. So, but I knew I found a target. I knew I was right near where Marshall said I should be, and here's the Marielle. So we thought. This is kind of a zoomed up close-up of it, and we can see the different ribs and things here. And this is not very large because I can't dive. I couldn't go down there and measure it. But all this is maybe 12 feet or less. But I was in some kind of wreckage field, and because this is very soft bottom there, I figure a lot of this is buried just like Marshall had told me it was. And this is the only photo I know of the Marielle. Again, a two-masted schooner scow. Built in 1895, it was 62 feet long, was around 30 tons. When it sank or burned over there, I don't even know if those masts were still on there. Since they were using it as a barge, there's a possibility those masts were removed, but my guess is they might have held on to them because they would use those booms to help lift and move things about the deck. After I left the Marielle, that was my main target that day. That was 90% of what I was thinking about that day was that Marielle site. I was totally focused on that. So now I finished over there for the day, and I had acquired this map from Dick Boyd, who got it from Doug Weimer. Right, Doug? Guilty. And I'm looking at this, and Sturgeon Bay at one time had dozens and dozens and dozens of vessels abandoned in it, especially up by the shipyard here. It was kind of a boneyard, they called it, for old vessels. And a lot of them were sticking up out of the water, and they were hazards. And then they were moved around, and then some were put back in service, some were pulled up on the beach, some were burned, and a lot of them, most of them were dredged out and just disposed of. The map showed some wrecks along the sides here of the canal over by the old Goodrich dock and sort of where the boat launch is today. I kind of discounted those because I thought it's a very active area. There's been a lot of dock work done there over the years. And this map is from 1908. So, but regardless, even in that wind, I thought, well, I can maybe get some kind of image today. And I went down and I started working both sides of that canal and just checking to make sure that what I thought that these were gone were really gone. And after a few hours, I realized, yeah, there's nothing here. So my last thing to look at of the day was this site right here. and this map indicates a wreck. It even says wreck. And I thought if I'm going to find anything else today, this would be the spot where it would be. This is out of the way of everything. It's away from the shipyard, it's away from the canal. But another thing didn't make sense to me is how could it be there and nobody know about it? How could this get missed, especially in the shallow area like this? It's a spot where it should be able to be seen from swimmers and things like that. So the next one here is a better, this is a little different map, but it shows it a little more clearly. So there's that wreck. And this is called Prospect Street, but now it's North Lansing Avenue. So a lot in downtown here or this side of the shore has changed. And it's completely different. So we're going to go to a different map. And this is from some of the tourist information. It's from one of the current tourist maps. And so people can get a better idea of where I'm going. So where we're looking at is right over here, kind of where it says Bayview Park, right there, right off Bayview Park. And so the shipyard's here, right there would be Dunlap Reef, and the canal kind of comes through that way. The museum is right over here. Yep. And boat launch here. So now we have updated this map and we pretty much know where we are. And this map is in the different literature that's in the Sturgeon Bay booklet. And in the back, they have this current map. And the reason, again, I'm showing this so everybody knows right where we are. And what's interesting in this one is right behind the sailboat, right about here, is where that target is. So I go over there, and on the first pass through, excuse me, I catch a target, a shipwreck, or what I think is a shipwreck. Excuse me. Because of the wind was 20 miles an hour that day with gusts of 30. So for me, looking at this image, it's kind of disarticulated, but it's enough there that I know that there's some wreckage here, there's wreckage all here, and there's stuff over here. That's all I need to know for the day. And then I got the GPS numbers. But I stayed out there about another hour trying to make different passes, and I actually only got 3 good sonar images. This was one of them. Well, immediately, I had been checking in throughout the day. I like to stay on the phone with somebody when I'm out here alone, especially early or late in the year when the water's really cold. If I fall out of the boat, at least somebody knows kind of where I am. So I've been calling my friend Greg Kenton, giving him updates. So he knew I found the Marielle site. Then when I found this, I immediately called Richard Boyd and told him, hey, that target on the map that caught our eye, there's something here, and it's fairly good size. And he was thrilled, and I let my friend Greg know. And those calls ended, and I stayed there, and I continued my searching and throwing my marker buoys out and just seeing how big this was and getting a feel for what's there. But I never really got a good picture that I thought of what I was happy with. But at any rate, in less than a half hour, Richard Boyd had called me back and he said, Bob, I think this is the wreck of the schooner Pride. So I haven't even left the wreck site yet. And my friends were researching and already had a ship name or a boat name, which I thought was amazing. And so this is one of the other images I've gotten that day. And this was zoomed in with my Lowrance. And you can see that it really looks like a keel possible parallel structure here. And then things that look like they had fallen away on both sides. So I'm thinking that this is probably a schooner that is split open. But the historical data also said that there were piers in this area. It could be a pier that had fallen over or fallen in or something. So I really wasn't sure 100%. And this is what I know of the schooner Pride. It was built in 1866. It was built in Ohio. That's important later. 2-mast, a wooden hull. Its length was 71 feet, 21 foot wide. And even before I left the site, I thought, how did that schooner get here? What's the story? So later on, researching, this is the story. On Saturday, August 20th, the schooner Pride had departed Milwaukee for Egg Harbor under the command of Jacob Wilson with his oldest son, Thomas. Real quick, I forgot to mention, the Pride also was primarily owned by different owners, originally in Racine, then Sheboygan, and then Milwaukee. So those 3 communities is where it was sailing out of mostly. On Monday, August 22nd, 1889, the Pride arrived in the afternoon in Egg Harbor, actually just outside the harbor, dropping its anchor. Captain Wilson went ashore to secure a cargo of lumber. Thomas, his son, stayed on board, attending to the different tasks on the vessel, including making dinner. Later, Captain Wilson arrived back on board the Pride as there were darkening storm clouds approaching. Captain Wilson and his son Thomas prepared the vessel for heavy weather and went down and started to eat. As they were taking their first bites of their dinner is when the storm hit. It was just a powerful wall of wind, how they described it, and with heavy rain. It hit the Pride hard. Immediately, both Thomas and Jacob went back up on deck and ran to the bow to feed more anchor chain out so this vessel could ride this storm out and not drag anchor and go ashore. As that was happening, the son felt obviously that he had helped his dad enough. He ran to the stern then as his father was paying out more anchor chain, and the father, Jacob, was watching Thomas run below. As Thomas went below in the cabin, excuse me, at that moment, the wind hit from a 90-degree different direction with even greater strength and immediately started rolling the Pride over. And, excuse me, the vessel completely rolled over 180 degrees and the top masts were now stuck in the bottom of Green Bay. As it was rolling over, the captain jumped off the bow, but he didn't know what happened to his son. This wind and storm passed by rather quickly, it sounded like, and the captain was able to climb back up on the overturned boat, and he started looking for his son. People from shore came out there to help him. Of course, he was just frantic, and they just could not find Thomas anywhere. He was missing. He was gone, and it was just terrible. On August 23rd, Captain Wilson left Egg Harbor and walked until he could find a phone that worked, and he called Sturgeon Bay asking for help. On the 24th of August, then, the Sturgeon Bay life-saving crew arrived, and they were told by a Lethem Smith salvage tug called the Right. They were able to right or correct back up the schooner Pride. They pumped it out, but Thomas was not inside there. He was missing and believed to be on the harbor bottom. Thursday, August 25th, the tugboat Right towed the Pride to a dock in Sturgeon Bay. On September 10th, the Pride was put up for a marshal's auction. It did not sell. Between those two dates, the body of Thomas had come ashore in Egg Harbor and was recovered. The people here of Sturgeon Bay were just extremely saddened and distraught with the loss of Thomas. He must have been well liked in the community. They took up a collection to help pay for the burial of Thomas. On November 12th of 1898, the Door County Advocate reports that the masts had been removed from the Pride and the fittings were to be sold to help pay the salvage claims. Captain Jacob Wilson just didn't have the money to pay for any of this, to pay for the toll, to pay for his son's burial. He just did not have the money. Report stated the Pride had been later than after that, in September of 1899, reports state the Pride had been pumped out and towed to the south end of Dunlap Reef and refilled with water. So they were moving it out of the way, out of that shipyard, and putting it on the reef, basically for storage. In June of 1900, the newspapers report that the tugboats Leatham and Nelson pumped the schooner Pride out and towed it just west of the bridge, the railroad bridge, then tied it to a dock. Later, the Pride drifted a short distance off the dock and sunk. So, where we found that wreck, the historical record places the Pride. So we don't know yet if this is the Pride, but everything indicates it is. And here is a picture of the Pride in the left side of this image. The photo's been enhanced a little bit by Greg Kent. So I went back on May 22nd of 2021 and put my little drop camera down there, and it's low quality, but I do get an idea of what's there. So this is part of the hull. So it doesn't look like it would be a dock. It looks more wrecked to me. This is a part of some machinery that's on there. We'll see better pictures of that soon. This is another photo shot of that machinery. And then I went by it later with my Garmin, and I didn't expect to see anything, but the Garmin actually did catch the shipwreck. So this is the bow. This is the wreck kind of coming out. And I was surprised that it even did that. Here's another shot with the Garmin. Now we can see like the spine or keel of a wreck here with some stuff on each side, something here and some stuff over here and here. Later, I believe this to be part of the old dock that it drifted away from. Again, the historical record is supporting what we're finding. Interesting. And that's what's nice with this Garmin. It goes out further, so I can see further than I do with the Lowrance, but I don't get quite the detail. So winter's here and I'm bored and I need a break from researching books. So I drive up here from Racine, and over this Pride site, they have an ice motorcycle racing track. And part of it literally did go over the shipwreck site. So I bore a hole down and see the shipyard in the background and the Dunlap Reef. Lower my camera down. The GPS is so accurate. I have one hole and one target and I'm on it. And this, for me, made me feel a lot better because now this is looking more like ribs sticking up. I couldn't get these shots earlier in the year. It was just too many weeds. And now I know that this probably is a shipwreck, not a dock, and it's more supporting evidence. There's another shot. You can still see some of the weeds here. In the summer, I can't do anything here. This whole site fills in with weeds, which is why this hasn't been found. So that explained that also. And then I came back in March, drilled another hole, and getting some more shots. And here's more shipwreck ribs, more of the wreck covered with the weeds. That's how thick they are. Even under the ice, it's a lot of weeds. Different color now with the sunlight out. So time to bring in the big guns. So I contacted a friend of mine, Rick Richter, and we decided to get out real early in the season before the weeds come up. You can still see there's some ice on the boat launch here. And Rick is going to dive out of that little boat that early in the season, and he's set up for deep diving. So he's got big, heavy double tanks. He's not set up for a shallow, protected area dive. But I also had set up my sonar that day because before Rick went in, I don't want to waste his time in very cold water. So I went around that site with the sonar and threw in different buoy markers so Rick knew right where to go and could concentrate on taking pictures and looking at this wreck rather than trying to find it. That worked well. There he is. You can see his double tanks. And this, again, this boat's overloaded with equipment. And it was windy that day where I got lucky finally, and the weeds are down, and I got an excellent sonar image. Now with the Lowrance, now I got the keel. This is the bow sticking up. Here's parts of the hull that have fallen off to the side. Here's the other side, and here's more wreckage. And what's also good with this photo is this is what's left of that old dock it was tied up to. And this, again, this is the bow sticking up. And you can see this bow comes very close to the surface. When the lake levels are low, this bow must be just a couple feet under the water. I'm still amazed that this hadn't been found before. There's Rick ready to roll in, and there's our museum right there. There's the Michigan Street Bridge, and people of Sturgeon Bay should recognize right where this is. And now the water is very clear. Rick is swimming out to the site, and you can see the Lowrance sonar transducers are up out of the water. And this, we did not get a lot of photos that day. Rick was using my camera, and a lot of the photos are of the same stuff. So I didn't want to show all the different photos of the same thing. So we're not going to have a lot of photos here, but this is the bow and parts of the vessel that have fallen away. And the visibility is pretty good, and the weeds are mostly gone. Part of the deck, you just see, it's amazing. It's still intact like that. It's bent and things, but there's still a lot there. You can see that dusting of material probably from the weeds when they fell down. And here's what I saw when I was lowering the camera in the ice. Here's these ribs sticking up. Again, weeds in the background. And you touch anything here or get close to it, it just immediately clouds up. It's very, very silty here. This Rick took, and this is actually the keel, and this is where one of the masts would have gone in. It's a mast step. So that would have been where that bottom of that mast locked in, right there. More of the keel. This is going towards the stern. Rick thought he saw the rudder back there, but I don't have a picture of it. He didn't get a photo of it. But here we can see the keel, some of the ribs coming out, and some of the stuff that had fallen away from the vessel. Again, just maybe less than 1,000 feet from the museum. Piece of machinery. I'm not sure what this is. It's either part of a pump that was used when they were pumping this out, or part of a winch, a mechanical winch used for moving it, is what I'm thinking. This looks like another mast step right here. You can see all the quagga mussels on this. It's just heavily encrusted. And more of the ribs and keel. It's another shot. More of the structure. So the next thing I wanted to do was to get a site drawing of this. So that can help verify it is the Pride. So what we do is we get divers down in the water that are trained and they know how to draw, and they're going to make a drawing of this. But we had to do it very early in the season because come middle of May, the boat traffic starts increasing. There's a public beach just near here. And there's also the Dunlap Reef. So this vessel is kind of like in a channel that's heavily used by boats. You can't dive this in the summer because of the boat traffic. Even with a dive flag up, you would have a good chance of getting hit. And you're not going to see it. The visibility is going to be very bad, and it's going to be choked off with weeds. So we had to get out there early. We had some cancellations on our project. And then we had some equipment issues, and we also had a lot of cold wind. And the days we were there, we never caught a break. So we got two divers in the water, John Tyndall and Russell Lights. We were there May 3rd and May 4th, and they started making a drawing. But it just was one issue after another. This gives you an idea. That's the boat. You can see the waves, and these guys were trying to swim from the public beach all the way out to where this wreck was and back, and then do drawings. And it just was too big of a mountain to climb with just everything stacked against us. And so we were going to have to plan that for another day. Since then, I've had Tammy Tomlinson from the state there. She went on the Pride, and she was pleasantly surprised. She said, "Bob, most of this vessel is here." Now, a lot of these wrecks that are in Sturgeon Bay, there's parts here, parts there, and they're pretty tore up. They're not complete. This one is most of it's there, minus the mast and the hardware. So that's also incredible that that hadn't been found. So the state is looking at coming back this spring, and they will do the drawing. They have more horsepower maybe, and so they will do that drawing, and then we will be able to say for sure if this is the Pride or not, even though we are pretty sure it is. This is a photo of the dock I took from the boat that day, and you can kind of see there's some structure of that dock left, and that will become part of the historical record too when they do the drawing. Now, we had a loss of life there. That was Thomas Wilson. And I was going to try and find his grave that was mentioned. I knew it was at Bayside Cemetery. And I went over there and I started walking around, and I realized it was hopeless. It's a large cemetery. So then I came to the library here and met Laura, who helped me connect with Paul, who's kind of the caretaker of the cemetery. And he knew right where to look, got me hooked up on it. And I went over there, and here's Thomas's gravestone. And you can see that the community loved him. I mean, this looks to me like an expensive gravestone for that time period. And the thing actually looks like it's brand new. It doesn't, it's a little dirty, but it doesn't look weathered or like a lot of them would look. So you could just see the love the community had for this young man. I called Paul and asked if I could dig there a little bit. He told me what to do. He said yes. And so I followed his instructions, and I dug a little deeper. And there it is. That's when Thomas was born in 1874. And he died, like it said in the story of the Pride, August 22nd, 1898. The whole thing was just very sad. On that day that the Pride turned over in Egg Harbor, it was not the only vessel there that day. There was another one, and that one was at anchor. That was the Norman, and that one also rolled over probably about the same time that the Pride rolled over. It had one crewman on board, Louis Tillman, and he drowned. And so there were actually two vessels lost there that day, and two crewmen, one on each vessel. So I have not found the grave of Louis Tillman yet. He's buried in Egg Harbor. And of the Pride, doing the research, it's interesting because there's actually 2 Prides lost in Door County. And so when we started looking at this, it gets a little confusing because this is the second Pride, and this one was built in 1849. But this one here was also built in Ohio, was also built as a 2-mast. It was also primarily used in Lake Michigan. It was also in the wood trade primarily. It was in that time period also sailing out of Door County, and both vessels were lost in Door County. This one's lost up by Washington Island. And it was found in 1983. It's in 40 to 60 feet. I never dove this one, but I knew about it. So sometimes doing the research and trying to figure all this out, it gets interesting with 2 of these, with all those similarities. This one, what makes it interesting is that it was in 1880, it was lengthened, and a 3rd mast was added. So that helps with some of the research. This is a picture, again enhanced by Greg Kent, of the Washington Island wreck. When they found it in 1983, on board, they found a signal cannon similar to this one. And where that signal cannon ended up, I don't know. It was put on display at various places. But it was also used for the life-saving crew. And so that's something I'd like to figure out someday, is where that thing ended up. Also, then in 1902, there was a schooner that was passing by, and it was caught in a storm, named Thomas Wilson, which I just added this because it's just, what are the odds of a vessel named Thomas Wilson having trouble off of Egg Harbor? Came ashore north of Horseshoe Bay. It was then righted and brought into Egg Harbor and docked. And then on November 21st, 1902, it came free from its dock, drifted to a nearby beach, and was smashed in another storm. It was a total loss. It has nothing to do with our shipwreck story, but I just find that a vessel with that name was lost near where Thomas, the crewman, died. And that's the completion of this. And I'd like to thank Richard Boyd for helping me, Marilyn Blood, Eleanor Y, Greg Kent, and Janet Deneff for helping me put all this together in the research.